Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm Anna Fotyga, member of the European Parliament, and I moderate today's panel dedicated to actions in solidarity with Ukraine and thinking about future of Ukraine. So contemporary assistance for Ukraine to win the war, Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, in particular to assist in sustainable economic possibilities to maintain this action, and later on the rebuilding of Ukraine. So together in solidarity for Ukraine, I will introduce our distinguished panelists when giving them the floor. But first and foremost, allow me to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Vsievolod Chentsov, head of the mission of Ukraine to the EU, to introduce the topic and speak about situation of Ukraine now during the war, in particular focusing on humanitarian and economic issues. All of us support Ukraine. We are aware of brave Ukrainian fight against Russian Federation, Russian army, but today's topic is different. So, Excellency, floor is yours.
Many thanks, Madam Minister, and good evening. Thank you very much for having me. Yes, indeed, Ukraine is fighting this terrible war, and it is a very big burden on the Ukrainian budget, on the Ukrainian society, and monthly we spend around $4 or $5 billion so on average to withstand this pressure. And I don't count here the money we have to allocate for recovery, and it's the amount is growing. So the total amount we will have to spend for reconstruction probably will reach hundreds and hundreds of billions when this war is over, and it is really a paramount importance that we mobilize all possibilities, all our friends and allies to help Ukraine already to develop the platform for reconstruction of Ukraine. And we are talking about the financial instruments on one hand, on the other hand, the system of coordination of this financial and technical assistance. So we are looking forward to hear from the European Commission this week, which is due to present for consideration of the European Council meeting this vision of the reconstruction and solidarity platform for Ukraine. It will be discussed in the beginning of the next month in Lugano. So the annual conference, as it was planned, was supposed to concentrate on reforms, but now it will be concentrated on future reconstruction of Ukraine, but also how to cover current needs. And this is also I wanted to emphasize, because the winter is coming, the school year is coming, and we need to really to do urgent things in the areas which were devastated and liberated by Ukraine. And I'm talking about the area around Kiev, about Chernihiv. In Kharkiv, the fighting is still going on, but people, in spite of those terrible things, they're coming back. So we have more people now returning to Ukraine from the European Union than entering the EU. And this is something to take into account. So basically there should be two stages. So immediate support now, so-called winterization, and also staging a bigger comprehensive plan for the next steps. And definitely this plan should take into account also Ukraine's approach to the sectors which we need to concentrate our attention. We are talking about 8, 9, 10 main sectors like agriculture, energy, logistics, definitely those sectors which should be rehabilitated because of the war, but also which can give a strong boost and generate cash to revive Ukrainian economy. And definitely the European integration agenda, the reform agenda, bigger reform agenda also should be taken into account because it is not possible to revive the economy without finalizing those reforms. They are still on due. I mean the justice system reform, anti-corruption reform, deregulation, and so on and so forth. I wanted to use this opportunity to emphasize the special role of Poland in this process of reconstruction. The theme of the conference is Congress 590, which is a code of the Polish product, but I think it should be, this conference should also cover the code 482, which is Ukraine code, and it is about definitely using the potential of Poland and hospitality and readiness of Polish people to help of Polish businesses to contribute, but also to help Ukrainian companies, Ukrainian businesses to survive, to continue production, development, both in Ukraine, where it's possible. Many of them are already relocating their activities to the western part of the country. Some of them are considering doing business in Poland. And I think it's a phenomenon of this war that Ukraine, in spite of all difficulties, still function as an economy. And yes, we need humanitarian support, we need technical assistance, but mainly what we need is a very targeted approach how to help Ukrainian economy still to function and to develop in this difficult situation. And to do this, we need to revive and to rebuild, and when necessary, to build new logistical connections, especially in the border area, to mirror the infrastructure already existing, and it has been developed for the last 20 years and more in Poland, and I mean those bigger logistical business hubs, business incubators, but also to do the same on the Ukrainian side. So we need political will to do that, because we will need also to generate relevant resources. We are talking about the public money, the relevant funding to be provided by the European Commission, development banks, private sector, and But it's not only about Polish and Ukrainian business. I think it should be a common effort, and many companies, they can not only help, but also benefit from those new opportunities, both in Ukraine and Poland. And definitely, last but not least, we are calling international business to stop their operations in Russia. And it's not only a moral issue. It has been proved already that companies which are pulling out of Russia, their standings, their profits on the stock and the cost of their companies on the stock market has improved, and it's confirmed by recent data. And I would like to cite the relevant report of the Yale School of Management, which emphasize on that issue. So I think I will stop here. Yeah,
Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for these remarks. Now I'd like to turn to my dear colleague, Rasa Jukneviciene, MEP of Lithuania, former Minister of Defense of this country. Rasa, for many years already, we used to talk here in the European Parliament about the Marshall Plan for Ukraine, and started after annexation of Crimea and discussions about EU prospects of Ukraine. What are your reflections now about those possibilities?
Maybe first of all, I will start saying that as a person who is linked or was linked with military affairs, I know very well that every military, they know the rule that after every battle or every military exercise, you have to evaluate lessons learned. So the politics related with the Russian Federation before 24th of February was a huge, big mistake of some countries. The approach was engagement. And of course, I am not blaming these politicians. Those politicians, they believed that it's possible to engage Putin regime or Kremlin and to help them to become civilized politicians. But that was a mistake, this approach. And today, when we speak about Marshall-like plan or the future of Ukraine, we have to understand this, to learn these lessons, and not to repeat the mistakes, first of all, and to keep unity and very clear understanding all democracies all over the world, that we have to win this war, we have to defeat Putin, we have not to be afraid to look into the future of Russia without Putin and with different Russia. Without that approach, I am afraid again we will be back to the same mistakes, doing half of the job, not doing everything until the end. And if we will have this clear approach towards this regime, that we have to defeat it together with Ukraine, so it would be very clear for everyone that today, number one is weapons. Ukraine needs to defeat this regime, because without victory, it will be no Marshall-like plan for Ukraine, because it maybe will not be Ukraine as we imagine Ukraine, as we want to see Ukraine as a sovereign, independent country with its sovereign territory, which is under the international law. Second is, of course, sanctions to Russia. and also, as you mentioned, Marshall-like plan, because what we see today is very similar what happened with Europe after the 1945, when Hitler was defeated and Marshall-like plan was implemented. This experience, of course, it's not everything the same, of course, I agree, but we have to generate financial, start to think about how we will generate the fund for rebuilding. And this, if we will be able to do this as now, to start to think about that issue now, it will be a hope. We will send hope for Ukrainians that we are ready to do this. Because otherwise, hopeless people, they cannot fight for their future without understanding that we are behind. We are behind. And if you will ask about the concrete incomes to this fund, of course, member states of EU, donors' contributions to, and not only EU, other countries as well. I am sure that Great Britain, the United States, many other democracies, they will stay behind and they will do this. I think it's very clear that no other choice. Just to help Ukraine to win this war, rebuild Ukraine, and of course, very important is to include Russia's compensation for the war damages. It's a very important component, and including those Russian assets, they are confiscated, seized, as a result of sanctions in accordance with international law. Maybe we need to change the law. Maybe we'll need to look what is needed to take these assets. But this message is very important.
Reparations.
It's
also.
very reparations also, as Germany is doing for a long time, and Russians have to know this as well. This regime that they will be responsible also to compensate this damage their leadership started to do, and they were involved into that. This is my position, and by the way, this is position of my political group I am representing here in the European Parliament. We adopted a paper on our group's position, 31st of March, including about Marshall-like plan to rebuild Ukraine. By the way, it was not easy. Debates were inside the group, but now we are united, and we have this position, at least for the beginning, to debate, to discuss for the details.
Thank you, Rasa. Thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, there is also transatlantic component to this debate. For example, a few weeks ago, there was a meeting between Polish authorities together with representatives of the government of Ukraine, with presence of the EU Commissioner for Agriculture, as well as the American Secretary for Agriculture, talking about possibilities to enhance Ukraine efforts to export grain and thus making it easier for countries suffering also because of this war. We already know that Russia steals Ukrainians' grain and tries to sell it. Our aim is to assist Ukraine in this. I have the remote presence here to welcome Mr. David Kramer, former Assistant Secretary of State of the US, former President of Freedom House, and currently the fellow of McCain Institute. Third, can you take the floor now?
Yes, thank you very much. And I apologize for not being with you in person. I'm actually in Dallas now, where I'm the managing director of global policy at the George W. Bush Institute. And President Bush certainly has demonstrated his concern for what is happening in Ukraine these days. But let me also note that today is a federal holiday here in the United States. It is Juneteenth. It's the second year of this holiday, celebrating the announcement on June 19th, 1965, in Texas, here in the state of Texas, where I live, that enslaved Americans were free. This was done in Galveston, Texas, announcing that African Americans were no longer slaves. They had won their freedom after a terrible civil war in the United States. Today, Ukrainians are fighting for their freedom, and their fight is incredibly important, not just for Ukraine, but for every country in Europe and around the world. And it's critically important that we help Ukraine to victory and to a Russian defeat, so that this never happens again. I want to echo what some of our colleagues have already said, which is helping Ukraine recover from the terrible devastation inflicted as a result of this invasion is critically important. It will require an international effort. Europe, the United States, Canada, many countries around the world. The stakes are enormous. The invasion of Ukraine has caused the greatest security crisis since World War II. We are on the verge of a global food crisis. We have been in a global energy crisis. And all of this is due to Mr. Putin. And as part of this reconstruction for Ukraine, I would echo what has been said, which is that we should not just freeze Russian assets, but we should seize Russian assets and use those assets to help Ukraine rebuild. After all, it is Russia that has caused this damage. And so there is more than $300 billion in foreign hard currency reserves in Europe and the United States, more in Europe than in my country. That is significant money to use as reparations and payment for the damage, the terrible damage that Russia has caused Ukraine. That will not bring back the lives of those who have been lost in this terrible war, but it will help rebuild the lives for those who are still in Ukraine. We also have to make sure that in the West, we don't talk about Ukraine fatigue. After all, we are not the ones doing the fighting. Ukrainians are fighting and dying for their country. The least we can do in the international community is put up with some inconvenience as a result of higher prices, while at the same time doing everything we can to help Ukraine succeed. And so it's time to stop talking about Ukraine fatigue. It's time to stop talking about Ukrainian neutrality or territorial concessions or any ceasefire. Our goal, along with Ukraine's goal, should be Ukrainian victory, which means expelling Russia from Ukrainian territory and ensuring that Ukraine has the ability to return to its rightful place as a proud member of the international community. I salute the European Parliament and the European Commission's recommendations to make Ukraine a candidate member of the European Union. That is a positive step. but we have a lot more we can and should do to help Ukraine succeed and to make sure Mr. Putin never does this again. Thank you very much for having me join you. And again, my apologies for not being with you in person.
Thank you very much indeed for this powerful message. Now allow me to give the floor to Batu Kutelia, Ambassador Batu Kutelia, former Deputy Minister of Defense of Georgia during Russian war waged on Georgia in 2008. I say this responsibly with simply saying simple truth. And he knows very well the value of being true to your beliefs, to assessments, and to really stay in solidarity with those who suffer. But the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. It's a great pleasure to be with you and to have an opportunity to discuss a very important issue that is happening now. And in our watch, we see new Europe, new global order under the formation process. And every day and every decision we make on every level will affect what kind of lives we will have in the future. And that's why we always argue that what is happening now on Ukrainian territory when Russia brutally attacked Ukraine, what has happened in 2014 when they took Crimea, what was happening during all those years when Russia tried to infiltrate within the democratic processes of the democratic countries, trying to influence elections or trying to meddle through the institutional process of having ability to elect whom the people of democratic societies desired, is a long chain of actions that visibly started in 2008 when Russia invaded Georgia. At that time, Georgia was a front runner in terms of democratic transformation, and thanks, David, for mentioning President George Bush, who made a very important landmark visit in Georgia's recent history. President Bush's visit in 2005 was an important and will remain a key decisive watershed moment when Georgia was brought on the global map of democracy, when he called Georgia beacon of democracy. And that was an ambition that we had as a Georgians at that time, that we were not building not only our country, but something bigger. So the same feeling all Georgians have now, that Ukrainians are not fighting only for their country, but they are fighting for our values, for our world, the world that where we want to live. And we do not want some uneducated, ruthless dictator with a false understanding of history giving the way how to live or dictate our way of life. Therefore, I think this entire last 14 years of transformation, sometimes lack of strategic vision from our side, gave us some lessons. And since Marshall Plan was mentioned, I agree fully that the Marshall Plan is something that is needed immediately. And I think the restoration and reconstruction of Ukraine should start in parallel of the ongoing military operation. We have to show the autocratic world, and Putin is not alone. He has accomplices, the different scales and caliber autocrats, to show that West can do several tasks together. Fighting autocrats, but also building economy, providing peace, and pushing them back. We have to be on offensive. And reconstruction and the Marshall Plan should be part of this offensive. And therefore, again, if we bring some historical analogy, Marshall Plan would have been that success without NATO, without the security guarantees. I think plus on a third track, we also have to accelerate discussions about the Ukraine joining NATO, Georgia joining NATO, and making a bigger regional component, Black Sea as a NATO sea and the cornerstone of the new European security. So that's how I think we will prevail, and I am very optimistic. And the major reason for my optimism is the unity of the Western world, notwithstanding some internal debates and discrepancies in the position.
Thank you very much indeed, Batu. Of course, I echo your views on NATO perspectives that are also important. Last but absolutely not least is our outstanding expert, Mr. Brian Whitmore of the Atlantic Council. We want to conclude our debates with your reflection on current needs of Ukraine to sustain the efficient defense with our assistance. The West staying united in assisting Ukraine, both financially, economically, and in military terms to supply arms. Poland, my country, is a hub in delivering this assistance to Ukraine. But we are also witnessing Ukrainians' ability to find entrepreneurial skills immediately after finding themselves in secure environment. I see it with my own eyes every week. It's unbelievable how well they manage this unbearable situation. There is a state and well-functioning state of Ukraine, despite reforms and despite this these atrocities, genocide happening on territory of this country. So what is your view on reconstruction of Ukraine and contemporary assistance?
Thank you, Anna. One thing I absolutely do not worry about is the entrepreneurial skills of Ukrainians, having lived in Ukraine and being very familiar with them. And I also wanted to pick up on something you said and the ambassador said about how the Ukrainian economy is functioning and that this is almost miraculous. But I don't think you're giving Ukraine enough credit by saying just the economy is functioning. When I look at the functioning of the Ukrainian state, for example, what I see is the opposite, the polar opposite of a failed state. The Ukrainian state is one of the most highly functional states in the world right now, and it's doing so under conditions of warfare. And I don't just mean the functions of the state that are related to the war. Pensions are being paid, salaries are being paid, basic government services are being delivered. The state is highly functional. And we should be paying attention to this in the West, because when reconstruction aid goes to Ukraine, that is going to be money very well spent. By a state that right now is highly functional. So that's the first point I want to make about this. The second point would be that the reconstruction of Ukraine gives the West a chance to correct a wrong. It gives us a chance to correct something we got wrong after the Cold War. After the Cold War, it wasn't just engaging Russia in hopes that it was going to behave in a more civilized fashion. It was this belief that capital was politically neutral, that the opening of markets is going to solve all problems. And in doing so, we enabled kleptocratic, authoritarian states like Russia, but not just Russia, and we made our supply chains dependent on authoritarian states like China. The reconstruction of Ukraine is not just going to be something that is very good for the Ukrainian people. It's a very big business opportunity as well. A lot of money is going to be made in the reconstruction of Ukraine. This is going to be a massive, massive undertaking. And it is a chance for us to align capital with our values. Because what could be more of a higher value than rebuilding a democratic Ukraine? Right? So this, I think your analogy to the Marshall Plan is not misplaced. This is an overused analogy. In this case, I think it is highly, highly appropriate. So this is a chance to right this wrong something we got wrong at the end of the Cold War. This belief in the neutrality of capital. Here we're going to make capital work for democracy. And we're going to make capital work against kleptocratic authoritarianism, which brings me to my final point that was brought up by you, by David, by Rasa, about this seizure of Russian assets. I agree with David wholeheartedly. We should not just be freezing Russian assets, we should be seizing them. And there's precedent here. The Baltic states, after their annexation by the Soviet Union at the end of the Second World War, the Western powers did not return the assets of the independent Baltic states to the Soviet Union as Moscow was demanding. Britain kept Estonia's gold reserves in escrow until Estonian independence, when those reserves were given back to the Estonian people. I live in the Adams Morgan neighborhood of Washington, D.C. Right down the street from me is the beautiful Lithuanian embassy, the longest continuously functioning embassy in the District of Columbia. And the reason for this is because when Lithuania was occupied by the Soviet Union, that building was not turned over to the Soviet authorities. It was given to the Lithuanian diaspora in the United States, who held it until Lithuania was free again. So there is precedent for doing this and seizing these Russian assets, these 300 billion in central bank assets. I think I could see no better karmic justice than that money being used for the reconstruction of Ukraine. So on that note, I'll stop. I want to keep my remarks brief, because when you're last, you got to be very brief.
Thank you very much indeed. I think it was an excellent conclusion of our debate over political divisions transatlantically. We stay by Ukraine. Our aim is to assist Ukraine in winning this war and in pushing Russian Federation, Russian army out of Ukrainian territory. I would add also from Crimea, including Crimea, because Crimea is internationally recognized Ukrainian territory. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for listening to us.